Number 196, Apex Rathalos. Dread King is really held back by the fact it's based off of old gen Rathalos, so with Apex kind of being Dread King in 5th gen, that's a pretty good start. The design, however, is one of my least favorites the Apexes have to offer. It's literally slightly darker and edgier Rathalos. Not having gear doesn't help either. On top of that, I feel like Dread King's gimmick is a lot less special now with how the metal Raths have nuking fireballs on their own, but Rise Rathalos is really good, so the fight is definitely a lot better than its deviant counterpart. Yeah, I'm pretty torn on this one. I can't vote it any higher than Dread King, and I already wasn't the biggest fan of that one. Like Apex Rathy in the 5th gen fight does a lot of good, but everything else is a bit lackluster. A pretty fun fight, to be honest. As someone who never got to fight the Deviants, his battle made me pray they bring them back. Roaming Red Roar really elevated the experience when I fought him during the Rampage with friends. As someone who is blind to the series, I like the Apexes for their extra challenge. The only Rampage Apex that does enough different from its respective deviant to justify its existence, in my opinion. This guy would be a slap in the face to Dread King fans, if there were any. I love his carpet bomb fireballs, that's about it. Rise Rathalos is great in general, so by proxy, he is also pretty great. I suppose 3 stars. Apex Rathalos is honestly great, at least fight-wise. Obviously, he still suffers from the pitfalls all the other Apexes have. The design is standard Apex affair, and Rathalos is certainly the worst of them. The fight is already ahead of Dread King by the simple fact of it being based on Rise Rathalos. That alone makes me enjoy him way more. The lack of Dread King's bomb attacks sucks though, as they were my favorite part of that fight, but I prefer the better overall battle. Apex Rathalos is a decent fight, bogged down by literally everything else around him, but to be honest, that's most Apexes. A low 4 out of 5. I wish they kept Dread King's bombs and had Apex use them more regularly instead of just turning them into a generic Nova. Apex Rathalos also has very weirdly claim a move that originally belonged to Dread Queen Rathian, which is pretty strange. I guess it doesn't make the fight worse though, so whatever. Speaking of which, the fight is fine, even if I wish the bombs were still there. He's overall a pretty effective endgame version of the original, just like his Apex wife. I'd say it's a solid 4-star hunt like Apex Rathian, but that's before the gear tax. Out of all the Apexes lacking gear, this is probably the one I'm most salty about. Dread King armor was awesome. It was Rathalos, but with a cape. Capes are sick. I'm not going to dock Apex Rathalos more than the others for lacking gear, but it's just a big personal disappointment. -1 star for the gear, same as the other Apexes, but this one just hurts a little extra for me. 3 stars final. Number 195, Green Nargacuga. Green Narga suffers from similar issues to Azure Rathalos, in that pretty much everything that made him unique has been given to the base form. Double Tail Slam, staple part of Narga's moveset now. Stun-inflicting tail spikes. Rise's Narga spikes have a high chance to stun. Hopping from side to side twice, it's rare, but Narga can do that in Sunbreak, also Lucent too. That, and unlike Azure, Green doesn't have the best color palette. 2 out of 5, and that's only because Nargacuga is a really good base. This was the same game that gave us Brute. I don't know who at Capcom was like, you know that cool monster everyone likes? Yeah, let's spray paint it with the ugliest green color imaginable. Narga deserves a way cooler subspecies. Sadly, it's overshadowed by better variants like the Blinking Narga. What I remembered when fighting Green Narga is its stamina, so maybe if they went all in and added attacks that clearly look like they use a ton of stamina, like a backflip where the tail drags on the ground, throwing hunters into the air, following up with like a 360 spin or something, he'd be more memorable. Would give 2 stars, but I feel sad for it, so 3. 2 stars, not a great subspecies by any means. Nargacuga is pretty sweet, but green adds extra stun to make the fight more annoying. It looks hideous. Take the awesome Blackford Hunter and paint it neon green? Yeah, no. A cool subspecies and my favorite Nargacuga, sadly a sentiment that not many people seem to share. The green-brown gradients of the fur and the red tail tip look quite nice in my opinion, and the yellow eye trails are simply immaculate. Regular Narga may have gone on to steal a lot of what made green distinct, but I don't think it's necessarily fair to dock points against it for that. I'd be happy to see it return with a revamped moveset that makes it even more different than before. Perhaps they could lean more into the stunning spikes or even rework it into a paralysis monster, since that was already present on a couple of its weapons. Number 194, Blangonga. I love him. I think the idea of a giant mandrill living with a pack in the mountains is super unique. I mean, just the idea of all these monkeys living near the peaks in the snow, watching as you explore the area, it's so cool. Plus, he's a great taste of what's to come with Rajang. He sort of helps you prepare to deal with him by presenting you with a less overwhelming version. Honestly, he's got a really underrated roar. It's pretty badass, and as a monster, he has a great ecology, design, and some good weapons with a decent fight, but he does suffer from being a middle child, and his smaller Blangos are so bloody annoying, but overall, good, solid monster. I'll give him a 4. The coolest thing to me about Blangonga is that it manually removes paintballs that have been thrown at it, and it acts as a good middle ground Pelagus strength-wise, significantly stronger than Congalala, but also significantly weaker than Rajang. I'd give him 4.5 stars for being a unique enough monster. Solid design, has a pack mechanic, fun moveset, unique behaviors like wiping off paintballs, sick looking longsword if you upgrade it. He's a decent wall for newbies too. He actually destroyed me and my friend's playthrough in Generations Ultimate. They just couldn't handle him. For me, being a rookie crusher is an extra half point. So far, he's the least interesting of the OG monkeys. His fight is pretty much just an ice-themed, watered-down version of Rajang's with a few original moves sprinkled in, and he lacks the personality of Congalala. For what's supposed to be the middle ground between the two, he comes off as uninteresting compared to the two extremes. He does have tons of potential if they make him stand out a little bit more though. 2 out of 5 for now. Number 193, Khezu. Weird, odd, loud, and I wouldn't have him any other way. It was my first wall in Rise, so Khezu was my first learning experience. People hate Khezu, and I see why, but I only have positive to say for him. Hits the fantasy of what it's going for to a T. 5 stars. Really scared the shit out of me, but that's why I love him. My intro to Khezu was Rise, so I didn't know what to expect. And then he paralyzed me, and I panicked so bad from that moment alone. And also when he stretched his neck. The absolute goat, scrub killer, and overall cool guy. Hope Khezu just remains a mainstay in the series, because he really fights like nothing else in the modern games. Completely anti-Unga Bunga, and forces new players to use more than one brain cell in order to not just cart to overcommitting, something gravely lacking from a lot of the early mid-monsters in 5th generation. An awesome monster that greatly displays the diversity of the Flying Wyvern class. It's ugly as sin, but it's supposed to be. He just needs some minor adjustments to make him as truly creepy as he can be. Oh, and the lore is sick with this one. Definite 4 out of 5. Khezu is in a similar boat to Gypsaros for me, where I should probably find him more annoying than I do, though Khezu is definitely a large step down for me. The design is, it's unique. I like how it stands out from the rest of the monsters. Rise especially brought out a lot of the grosser aspects of it. Khezu isn't the worst fight, simple electric attacks with some lunges and some cursed neck movements thrown in. Honestly, I don't mind Rise's iteration. It's alright, and before that, it was a bit of a drag. While I like what they're going for and can appreciate the idea, the lack of music really throws me off and definitely makes the fight feel longer than it is. Khezu's a weird monster. I don't mind him that much, and he's kind of charming in an odd way, but there's just something missing that I can't quite put my finger on. 3 out of 5. Number 192, Snowbaron Lagombi. The most intense snowball fight. 4 stars flat. Big Chungus with big ass snowballs. He moves way less and gets more physical. He looks better too. Didn't like Lagombi until then. Now, he's pretty solid. 3 stars once more. Red Helmet Snowbaron are a good example of turning early game monsters into a threat. He's a really good monster. For his tier, he is a pretty difficult fight. He really shows you what you're getting into when it comes to the deviants. In fact, I haven't actually beaten him yet. The one knock against him, I would say, is the size of his snow attacks. Every one of them have massive range, and in GU, ice attacks still inflict the snowball effect. This can get pretty annoying pretty quickly, but besides that, I think he's great. I would love to see what the developers could do with him, especially in a game without the snowman status. I love Snowbaron Lagombi. It's fun and can be counter-built for. It just takes the funny bunny fight to the next level. The armor is great for any aerial style of play, and I used aerial style more than any other style. I'm extremely biased 5 stars. Like with Deadeye, Snowbaron is a pretty simple upgrade over the original, and I think that works pretty well. The increased size of their snowballs helps to make them more dangerous, and I really like the giant snowball they can pick up and throw at you. Especially if you use sonic bombs on them, while they're holding that giant snowball, you can get them to drop it on their heads. The difference is, I don't like the base Lagombi as much as the base Garuga, so I'm not gonna like Snowbaron as much. Other than that, Snowbaron is a pretty good baseline as to what makes a decent deviant. 3 out of 5, Snowball Fight Extreme Mode. Number 191, Apex Diablos. Base Rise was my first Monster Hunter game, after failing to get into MHGU. And I gotta say, Apex Diablos put desperation in me like no other monster had. I really didn't understand the mechanics. I didn't know you could negate tremors or roars with skills, so I had this horrible monster I couldn't beat and couldn't run away from. I wasn't able to win until I came back later, after actually playing through Generations Ultimates. People always trash Apex for being worse than Bloodbath, which is fair, but it's still a very memorable and challenging fight for those who don't already know Bloodbath. Our last Rise Apex. And Apex Diablos is lucky I have not fought Bloodbath yet to compare him to, if what I hear about Bloodbath is true. Standard Apex look, now with a more prominent blue. It's whatever, I guess. I'm already pretty sick of regular Diablos, and Apex doesn't do too much to remedy that. There's some good attacks here. The one where he uses his tail to throw boulders at you is pretty great, but it's just a faster, harder Diablos. Despite this, I think it's still fine. I'd like him more if, again, I wasn't sick to death of Diablos. 3 out of 5. I prefer to judge the Apexes by Rise alone instead of constantly comparing them to the Deviants. Apex Diablos was an intense but fun fight. If it had gear, I'd give it 4 stars, but since it doesn't, 3. 3 stars. Taking Bloodbath as your base is still a good design, even if it lacks a lot of the punch that Bloodbath had. Unfortunately, it is a visual downgrade and lacks some of the cooler fight details. One of the better Apex fights, but still extremely derivative, and the lack of gear sucks. 5 out of 5. I'm going to need to explain myself. Despite having not played Gen U, I've heard enough of Apexes are just off-brand deviants to be sure that it's true. And of course, Apex Diablos is just Bloodbath, but not. Now, unless there's some interview I haven't heard of, I don't think we'll ever know why they didn't just put the deviants in. That doesn't particularly matter to me. I get why people don't like it, because just put the deviants in, it's just Bloodbath but with no music. That's fair. Maybe I'd think the same way if I'd fought Bloodbath, but I doubt so. Because even if it's not as good as Bloodbath, that doesn't stop it from being good. My first Apex Diablos hunt was the first time Rise had a monster that beat some of my favorites from World and Iceborne. It's so much fun to dance with this guy. He's threatening, doesn't crumple easily like a base Diablos does, and he's faster and larger. As a giant Diablos fan, it's like a dream come true for me. I don't doubt that if I had experience with Bloodbath, it would be an easy 5 out of 5 because it's just cooler Apex. But Apex would still be a 5 out of 5 because it's just more of what I love. This is a Diablos appreciation post. Number 190, Terra, Shogun Ceanataur. Sadly, at the moment, he's one of the old subspecies whose classic moveset was just given to the revamped original monster, being that Sunbreak Shogun has Terra's moves. I even prefer the colors of the normal Shogun. That being said, I'd be really excited to see him in a new entry, as they now have a very clean slate that they can work with for this guy. They could make him a more volcanic Terra Shogun, though for now, he's just a 2 out of 5. I actually quite like the choice of color on this thing, with Terra living in hot volcanic regions and crab carapaces turning red when exposed to heat. It actually makes a lot of sense. I feel like this should have been the reasoning instead of diet for the color change. Regardless, old subspecies didn't typically have it very good, and Terra was no different. I honestly don't know how they're going to distinguish these two going forward. Love the orange crab as much as the blue crab, but it's basically non-existent considering his singular appearance. It'd be interesting to see Terra come back with a different set of skull shells to make him more unique from the blue Shogun. I'd like to see what they can do to revitalize Terra, but as it stands, he's just an unfortunate victim of moveset theft. His colors are definitely standout and creative, but there's not much more to them than that. Hope to see you soon. 3 out of 5. Number 189, Gravios. Okay, so might seem a little bit weird, but Gravios is, to me, one of the best mechanically designed monsters in the series. At least in GU, I haven't fought his other incarnations. He's basically a giant puzzle, and when I first solved it, it felt so good. When you first fight him, it looks like an unbreakable wall. He's so enormous compared to any regular monster in the series, besides Gammoth, my favorite monster. You genuinely think, how the hell am I gonna beat that thing? During the fight, you'll learn that hitting his head and his tail is very hard to do, but staying under him to attack his belly for too long might not be the best idea, both because of his body slams, but also because of his fire blasts from his exhaust pipes, both after and without his beams. The solution is easy to find out: mounting attacks. Gravios is probably one of the weakest backs in the series, so by mounting him, doing aerial attacks, or just knocking him over by attacking his legs a bunch, you can easily break his back, which severely speeds up the fight, as his fire and sleep blast will be expelled through his back, which leaves you to attack his belly, and by breaking his underplates allows you to deal enormous amounts of damage. It's a really fun fight, and you can choose which order you do things, but this is one of the best. Couple that fight with a really cool stone dragon design, him being fairly easy to hit because of how large he is, his awesome fire beam attacks, and his absolutely over-the-top ridiculous looking armor, and you have one of my favorite monsters to fight in the entire series, especially with Greatsword, Switch Axe, Insect Glaive, or Charge Blade. 5 stars from me. He's such a satisfying fight for some reason. He starts fully armored, but as soon as you start breaking his parts, the fight starts snowballing more and more in your favor. He starts tripping, allowing you to start breaking the belly, which, when it is fully broken, it feels so good because you finally open up his weak spots. Unironically, a really fun fight for me. I like the rise change to Bestiary, so making him heat up his parts so they break easier, but I almost hope they don't do that for Gravios, so they can retain the feeling of slowly weakening this giant rock dragon. Maybe if he just heats up his face and not his belly. And they also made his head really hard to reach, but otherwise, I really like Gravios as he is. Big Papa Rock. Considering he's a giant volcano golem, he's got such an imposing aura to him. The bellowing, the variety of lasers, and just the scope of him. He's really rad. 4 out of 5. Number 188. Lagombi. Listen. Whoever came up with the idea of combining a polar bear with a snowshoe hare, as well as making it toss giant snowballs and slide around like a living sled, must have been a mad genius. But yeah, it's a pretty great executed concept. 4 stars. Peak. Peak, 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 absolute peak. He can't see while sliding, so his ears are big for him to be able to change directions based on sound. They're also very sensitive and can be hurt by strong noises, aka sonic bombs. His belly is smooth and solid as to minimize friction with the soil during his locomotion. He can grab snowballs and throw them at his opponents. I love all that. I also really like his armor set. It's all Poke Village, but monster specific, and having evasion really alludes to his quick repositioning during combat. His weapons also come in handy against Zinogre. Design-wise, I like how their bladed parts are made of Lagombi's hard shells, while their handles are covered in his soft pelt. Lagombi is by far the best bear in the trio. 5 out of 5. Very high 3 out of 5 stars. I love bunnies, and his look is just great. The only thing keeping him out of 4 out of 5 is that his fight can get a little annoying with him being very fast at times. He's an okay monster. I like his design a lot. A very Monster Hunter feeling creature. Not too crazy, not too simple, but his fight is a different story. In pre-5th gen, it's a pretty annoying fight for me. His slides have pretty crazy hitboxes, and every single attack involving snow inflicts snowman. And his snow attacks themselves have ridiculous range. And in 5th gen, his fight is just kind of boring to me. He slides, he throws snow, he spins, sending a cloud of snow around him. None of it's super effective, and usually the closest thing to interesting it gets to is just slightly annoying. I give him a 3 out of 5. 3 stars. Lagombi is decent, taking the same basic shape and skeleton of Arzuros and remixing it into a slippery Arctic hare. It's a neat concept, but I don't find the fight that fun. And really, Lagombi doesn't do too much. The sliding around on the ice is a fun gimmick at first, but it mostly feels like it just lengthens the fight, especially when the majority of its other attacks are just recycled from Arzuros. It's okay, not amazing. Number 187, Apex Mizutsune. I will probably be lynched for saying this, but Apex Mizutsune is actually brilliant. The glowing purple looks gorgeous. The new moves are fun to play around, and he feels meaningfully different from Soulseer in a way that the other Rampage Apexes do not. Admittedly, the use of Hellfire in his moveset is never really explained, but he honestly uses it a little bit better than Magnamalo ever did, with his slippery movements making it really hard to bait him into your Hellfire traps. He is a really underrated monster, sadly let down by the nothingness that are the Rise Apexes. 5 stars. More or less Soulseer, but without the special enraged mechanics, which I think makes Apex mostly a downgrade. But at the same time, Soulseer's enraged moveset was meant to be somewhat overwhelming in GU to punish you for touching the bubbles. But in Rise, with our new tools, it's a lot easier to handle. So I can understand why they just made Apex enrage normally. But I still think it's a bit of a net negative. The bubble avoiding in order to prevent him from enraging aspect that Soulseer has could have made this a real standout fight in Rise, breaking up all the counter spamming with something a little bit more unique. So 1 less star than Soulseer for 3 stars, and then 1 less after that for not having any gear, so 2 stars final. Soulseer is another of the many deviants I haven't fought, so Apex Mizu is getting a much better treatment from me than from some of the others. The design is cool, the dark blues replacing the white body, and reddish fins make a great remix in a way to the base, a solid Mizu color-wise, and then the fight is fun. It changes the base in a lot of cool ways. It's cool to see Hellfire utilized in a different fight, even if it diminishes Magnamalo's use of it a little bit, but it's used differently enough that it's not a big deal breaker. Honestly, the main issue with Apex Mizu is that it's just another Rise Break Mizu. Violet uses a similar element and not only doesn't have the Apex's downsides, but is a much better fight overall. Still, a Mizutsune is a Mizutsune. Definitely the weakest of the ones I've fought, but a Mizu nevertheless. 4 out of 5. Apex Mizu was so mid, they figured no one would care if they reused the concept a 3rd time in the expansion with Violet Mizutsune. Number 186, Lao-Shan Lung. I always find his fight awesome when it's the first time against it. If you farm him, not so much. 5 stars because he always brings that feeling of awe with him. I love Lao. He needs to catch up and show off how great he can be with new mechanics. Wicked design, but dear God, the hunt. The dragon who walked so that the whales, Kulve, and Safi could run. Solo fighting, 3 stars. Fighting with your dork friends, 5.5 stars. Our experience with this guy in MHGU is hilarious and so much fun. The first siege monster, and it shows. The classic big monster walks and you hit it. That's the fight. He's not even really anything substantial other than his size and his very imposing design, taking more from the image of a drake rather than a dragon. His fight in Generations is a bit of an improvement with the mobile cannon, but otherwise it's kind of just a long one. 3 out of 5. I feel this monster gets too much credit for siege bosses. I feel it was the backlash from Zora Magdaros that sculpted Kulve Taroth and Safi Jiva. If anything, Lao influenced a really bad Zora fight that needed to be reworked. In my opinion, he sucks, his design sucks, and his armor sucks. Number 185, Congalala. I think he's more of a 3.5. Maybe high 3. Not because he's mid. On a basic level, he's a fart ape. His design is very funny, especially when he's enraged. Plus, when he eats different mushrooms, he has different breath attacks. And don't forget the unique pitfall trap animation. Very good design in my opinion. To be honest, he might be my favorite of the monkeys. The different interactions he has with the different types of mushrooms are awesome, and while he's a bit on the cartoonish side, he's one of the most realistic monsters in the series, because real-life monkeys are disgusting. I think he's a pretty good monster. His design is simply perfection, and his fight definitely is something. I think it'd be good to have him back just making his way through a rainforest, eating mushrooms, and bothering the local small monsters with his antics. This could also mean seeing him properly interact with the Congas. In conclusion, I think he's a pretty good monster with the potential to be a great monster. I'll give him a 3 out of 5. Farts are not funny. This thing is not funny. Farts are always funny. Flawless design. Number 184, Great Girros. Very underrated. He has a cool design with the snake features and the hood. He's the best pack monster ever made, being the only monster that can actually sync attacks with his pack besides Zuchi. When I saw him flare up and his 3 Girros jumped me all at once, I lost my Also, his gear is pretty awesome. 5 stars, and my first hot take already. This is the best pack wyvern the franchise has offered. The only one who directly commands its minions to attack. The common sound is an eargasm, by the way. The other pack minions, aside from Mizuchi, just kinda exist, and since he calls so many small Girros, it quickly turns into a big hazard if you don't have paralysis resistance. You can't ignore the small ones, you have to get rid of them. Great Girros is basically a mafia boss, and he looks so sick for only being a snake with legs. Yes, he's laughable when you get to him, but even then, he can put up a bit of a fight. As said previously, unlike Jagras, he actually has a health pool that doesn't immediately deflate when you throw something better at him than a rarity 4 weapon. And his equipment is both visually pleasing and quite useful, especially to all the apexes you fight afterwards. He is specifically evolved to counter another scavenger, Otagaron, and even was ready to fight an acidic Glavenus. My man may be low in the food chain, but he does have balls of steel. I don't care what other people think. He's one of my underrated boys because nobody else likes him. He lives in gangster's paradise. Literally. Insanely underrated, especially for a monster with such a good design and cool armor. The fight is basic, but the design makes up for it. Easy 4 out of 5. Definitely one of the cooler monsters of the Vale. 4 out of 5. A great introduction to status. Introduced way after you understand status. I doubt it, but would love to see him return in Wilds, just to give people another chance to love the little lizard for what he is. A small-time mob boss cobra that has lackeys to help defend him from the larger threats around him. I actually really like this guy. I think he's one of the best pack monsters mechanically, at least in 5th gen, and I really like his design. I can't think of any other monster that has the sort of salamander skeleton that he does. And the snake features he has mixed together for a really cool and unique monster. I also ended up fighting him a ton because I like paralysis weapons, and his were the best in the game. So that made me sure I never forgot about him throughout my playthrough, and that I spent plenty of time with him. 4 out of 5. Number 183, Shrieking Legiana. Dev team, how about we make a new Legiana? Give it literally only one new move, and make her stay in the air longer. Sold! Despite that, I love that the weakness of poison makes her full-on vomit, and all her air attacks get noticeably slower. Makes the fight a lot less annoying. I can tell you that much. It's such a subtle animation, but it's something I wish the poison status could do with more monsters in general, actually. And the equipment still looks awesome, especially the Palico armor. I would have preferred a tidal wave Legiana though, 3 stars. Legiana is already a 5-star monster on design, fight, visuals, and equipment. Now we have a Legiana, but slightly upgraded. It's another 5-star monster, of course. You can't rate it any lower than the original because it is at least as good, but in my opinion, a little bit better. The crawling ice waves are super cool, and the move where it totally vanishes into the sky before dropping from nowhere on you is a terrifying attack for a first-time hunter that makes it super memorable. Legiana gear already looked awesome. What if we removed the only slightly ugly element, the tan color, and replaced it? Top tier equipment. I get that people expected more from the monster, but you have to look at what it already is when you're judging the creature. Otherwise, you do dumb stuff like voting down Magmadron because you're salty that it is an Ignactor. Shrieking is super good. A bit annoying when regular Legiana shows up at the same time, but you have multiple solutions with dung pods, flint shotting, and even multiplayer to help you deal with it. And if you aren't using your tools to handle the monster, you are trying to fit a square block into a triangle-shaped hole. Legiana, but like mildly more annoying to fight, which isn't really bad because it's still a good fight in my opinion. I don't know. I might just be indoctrinated from grinding it a bit. It's got cool lore though. A lot of people dislike her for some reason, but I find Shrieking Legiana to be quite the enjoyable fight, especially when I'm using Greatsword. It's so satisfying to knock her out of the sky with a massive hit to the head. Many people don't seem to know this, but she actually has nearly the same ice armor mechanic as Velkhana. If you can shatter the ice shards on her body, she has a bespoke knockdown animation that lasts longer than normal. Personally, I find that really cool. I really like Shrieking, contrary to a lot of people. I get how you could find the air stuff annoying, but I personally have a lot of fun with him, and he has certain attacks that are visual delights. Also, just kind of looks awesome. A darker blue with frost all over it really works. 4 out of 5 because he's still not perfect. Number 182, Baleful Gigginox. Baleful Gigginox is great. Swapping poison for paralysis feels very appropriate for her, as this parasitic predatory beastie. Admittedly, paralysis is a much more annoying ailment to deal with, but that's what counterbuilds are for. She also doesn't lay the Giggy egg masses. Instead, the goop she produces will always explode. G-Rank will also excrete this goop onto her back, leading to one of the earliest hit the specific body part now or something bad happens later fight mechanics I can think of. That's super neat. Her color scheme isn't my favorite in the world, but that could just be because I love the original gray and red so much. Yellow and purple doesn't look bad on her, but it's not great either. She does become this sick blood red when she enrages though, so that's a point. 5 out of 5. What, Khezu? Never heard of him. If Gigginox was pretty much just better Khezu, Baleful is literally just better Khezu. Baleful does pretty much everything Khezu can, but built onto a better framework, i.e. they have Khezu's electrical field, except they use it as a simple defensive burst instead of as a continuous shield, making the fight a lot more fast-paced. They also have a really cool part break, as breaking their head reduces their paralysis projectiles to just thunder. I also like how their pin is done from the ground and is actually a move you can realistically get hit by. This is probably a hot take, but Baleful is my favorite of the portable third subspecies of a 3rd gen monster, so excluding Brute. Even without the Giggies, it just feels like the one with the most substantial changes from the original. 4 out of 5. It's Khezu at home, and then it can also switch to red Khezu when angry. Significantly worse than the normal Gigginox in my opinion. The paralysis spam is dreadful in addition to making him just feel more like Khezu, but somehow worse. Paralysis can be perfectly acceptable as a status effect, even if it is annoying, but it feels like Baleful Gigginox just prevents you from ever getting close to it with how much it spams AoE paralysis attacks. Much prefer the poisonous original Gigginox over this one. High 3 stars in my opinion. I like the base gold coloration and the enraged red color. The paralysis is annoying to deal with, but that comes with the territory. One thing that definitely lost at points was this one feeling more like Khezu than base Gigginox. I believe it has a similar lightning barrier attack like Khezu. It's definitely not as bad as other subspecies, that's for sure. Number 181, Rusted Kushala Daora. Even though the fight may be outdated, Rusted is a big part of why I like Kushala. In my opinion, it's just great to have an elder with some cool ecology. The concept itself is a fantastic example of a monster variant with some real thought put into it. Taking the basic concepts of metal rusting and reptilian creatures shedding their skin and mashing them together is a great example of simple design genius, and adds to that sweet ecology and lore that us monster hunters crave. I fully believe that a Rise-esque redemption arc could so easily be on the cards for his fights, but until me and my Unga Bunga hitty stick can actually hit him more than twice an hour, he's stuck with 3 stars. The end of his storyline in For You is peak Monster Hunter to me. Also amazing concept. I love his sound design too. 4 out of 5. Rusted Kushala is an amazing idea for Kushala's ecology. The fight itself doesn't feel all that meaningfully different from regular Kushala. If they ever bring it back, I'd love if they gave it a sort of Tycoon Zamuza treatment, where you're gradually chipping away at the armor and revealing the pearl white shell underneath. Once enough has been chipped away, it sheds what's left and exposes the completed shed. Then you fight a faster, more aggressive Kushala, but also with weaker armor and softer hit zones that takes more damage, with some unique attacks that can take advantage of the better agility that's been provided to it with the softer armor. Rusted has a great ecological reason for existing, a great story in For You. However, I mainly judge on fights with some influence from design. From the one time I fought Rusted, it was annoying. It is still pre-Rise Kushala after all. 3 stars.